Alright guys, we're going to continue our study here of India, taking a last look at some ancient Indian empires. So we see these big empires developed in India, and we'll analyze these in class this week on Wednesday. So first one are the Mauryans. So we're going to look at them from 321 to 183 BCE. Notice it's a lot longer after the kind of Central Asian empires, but we're still going to talk about them and use them as a comparison to the Greeks and the Romans who were around the exact same time. So the Mauryans are founded by a guy named Chandragupta, who was a little ruler of a city and basically started making a bigger and bigger empire. He was advised by a Brahmin priest, kind of combining the religion and the kind of government aspects. He was from that high caste, that Kshatriya ruler caste. Eventually, his empire goes to control his entire area here, that's in blue right here on the map. Now, one of the things he's really famous for is that he met the Greek leader Alexander the Great. Eventually, he's the one who kind of has Alexander stopped up here in northern India and pushes him back into Greece to talk about next unit. And so he's kind of one of those really, really kind of big people that were kind of important in terms of that aspect of history. He did live in this big, huge, walled-up city in his capital, so he kind of like kept himself locked in. He was actually really, really paranoid. He was paranoid of people trying to kill him. He thought about their secret plots, all those kind of things about his life. And eventually, he was actually being fed poison on purpose as a way to kind of like strengthen his immune system against, trying to protect himself, those kind of things. Eventually, he quits being king to become a monk, a Hindu monk, and goes on from there. It's kind of a unique kind of situation. But one of the first big empires that developed in India. But the greatest leader of the Mauryans is by a person named Ashoka the Great. Ashoka was this leader who kind of came to power in the Mauryan Empire, and he, in his early reign, he had a very, very powerful temper. One time, just to kind of test people's loyalty, he killed over 500 people just to test their loyalty one time, as a way to make sure that people were actually going to be loyal to him. It's kind of one of those little weird stories that way that he had. So yeah, basically, kind of look at this guy who was very, very in control, very, very powerful, very controlling. Now, the thing about him is that he expanded empire to be a very, very large area. The big war called the Kalinga War fought against the neighboring kingdoms, and in the end, it leads to over 100,000 people's deaths. And the people who weren't killed in this war, the civilians, he actually took them and deported them, kicked them off their lands to put his own stuff in. And so he comes around with his big entourage of people and starts touring the destruction. While he was touring the destruction, he's looking at this thing, all these destroyed homes, all that kind of stuff, and he's really kind of like moved. He's like, wow, I'm really doing this kind of stuff. I'm really causing all this damage and destruction. So he ends up, quitting this whole like destroying, ruling by power kind of thing, and instead becomes a Buddhist. And so he starts following the teachings of the Buddhist Siddhartha Gautama, and essentially makes Buddhism the official religion for the Mauryan Empire. And so it basically makes people become Buddhists. One of the things he starts making are public works, so public housing, public roads. And one of the things he does, he starts building all these little shrines that exist next to the road where the Buddha walked, as a way to kind of like protect the history of the Buddha. Now, funny part is that he was actually not nonviolent. Though Buddhists being very nonviolent, those kind of things. One of the things that Ashoka did was he would execute people who would not follow Buddhism, which really goes against Buddhist ideals, but that's just a whole other story. After he died, kind of his grip on his empire slowly falls apart after his death. One of the things he wrote, though, we have here are his edicts, and we have at least 33 of these stone inscriptions that contain information about his empire. Some of these things were on walls and pillars, those kind of things, but one of it's history. Okay, some of it talk about how he came to power, why he was so important. The other part was about teaching about Buddhism and explaining how people are supposed to live. So we talk about things like morality and generosity, which kind of behaviors to perform, how you follow the Eightfold Path, those kind of things. Essentially, these edicts he puts out there become laws. And Ashoka actually has a secret police to enforce these laws and basically make people become Buddhists. So it's kind of one of those interesting little things that Ashoka does in his leadership time that make him, in some ways, one of the greatest leaders in Mauryan history. Kind of leads to that big question of leadership of, can you actually make people do good? And can you make people behave? And we'll talk more about this in class on Wednesday when we talk about this topic. Now, the Guptas were the last big empire. This is actually in the Common Era now, after year 0. We're kind of bouncing around a little bit here, and we'll kind of catch up in the Western world shortly with this next 2 units. But a kid named Chandragupta I, okay, he received a little kingdom as a dowry. He was a prince, married a woman, and the dowry that he received in his marriage was a small kingdom. He then started expanding the kingdom, taking places over. After he died, his son could do the exact same thing. His son Samdragupta made that kingdom even bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the things that Samdragupta did is that he was a patron of the arts. And he basically allowed this, the Bodhi tree we talked about this on that video, that he allowed that monastery to be built and create this whole big area of Buddhist control in India. And one thing now, later on, Chandragupta II was kind of the height of power. He controlled India from coast to coast, and we see a lot of his art and sciences develop in India at this time. Everything from astronomy to math, calculus, those things that in Europe were not developed until 1,000 years later, start being developed in the 400s or so in the Gupta Empire. Basically, see kind of a little bit about this Gupta Empire here is that it was really India's golden age. First off, in Hindu culture, a lot of the writings actually start being written down during this time in Sanskrit. Before this, all the chants, the Vedas, the Mahabharata, all these different documents were being passed down orally, being chanted. And here, instead, we see these things being written down in Sanskrit, and our oldest documents typically come from the Gupta age. Art was the other big thing. Art came in a lot of different ways. One of the things art came into here was in this metalwork. And one example of art here from the Gupta era is this. It's basically a big iron pole. But it kind of shows the idea of working in iron, and it's decorated, and there's a number of these poles around from the Gupta era. Also, here we have kind of more buildings, construction, temples, stones, that kind of thing. We have a lot of Hindu art, like the images of gods and goddesses we analyzed in class. A lot of those develop at this time. We start seeing a lot more of these pictures develop and put together. In terms of science and engineering, we're going to take a look at this, but metalwork, using iron tools, iron weapons becomes huge. Astronomy, used for navigation, those kind of things, for trade, becomes big at this time in the Guptas. And especially mathematics as well. Things like zero are figured out. Ideas like calculus and trigonometry are figured out. And one of the best reasons they do this is to get the edge in war and get the edge in trade. And we'll talk more about this in class on Wednesday, with some examples of these topics in class. Now, our big source for the Guptas, why we know so much about the Guptas, is because of a man named Fa Zihan. Fa Zihan was a Buddhist monk who was a Chinese man who traveled to India. And he wrote down in his journals about all of his travels. And so it's kind of this really nice primary source we have from Fa Zihan's point of view, this outsider point of view into India, and looking at what happens in this Gupta Empire. Eventually, after this, I'm kind of just zip forward here up through modern day. We're kind of this little snapshot of Indian history here. There are different people that arrive in India after this. We're talking about a group called Mamluks. They were essentially slave soldiers, okay? They were sent to invade India as part of some Islamic empires in the Middle East. And they basically take over India around 1200 AD and continue on from 1200 to 1800 AD. So we're really covering a huge chunk of history here, if you want, about 2,000 years here in this 10-minute video. But one of the other big religions besides Hinduism and Buddhism in India is Islam as well. And so we see mosques built, trade in the Middle East and Africa. Eventually they fight with Mongols who try to invade India. And so Islam becomes a big part of Indian tradition. And so really Islamic rulers rule India for about 300 years. And it's a line of rumors going from a guy named Babur, who was kind of made this Mughal empire. So essentially, this idea of empires being passed down year to year kind of comes to this. There were different empires that existed. Humayun, a very powerful empire, who actually assassinated his father to get power. Akbar is by far the most famous of the emperors. He actually promoted religious freedom in the Mughal Empire. So Hindus were allowed to keep their religion, Buddhists were allowed to keep their religion. They may have just paid more in taxes, but they were allowed to keep their religion. One of the most famous Mughal rulers was a person named Shah Jahan, who actually built the very famous Taj Mahal. He built the Taj Mahal as a kind of the mausoleum for his late wife. Now, eventually, rebellions started taking place in India. Hindu groups kind of start revolting against the Muslims. And eventually, the Mughals will fall by the 1850s when Britain takes over in India. So we really saw kind of this really relatively kind of peace between the Mughals. There wasn't really a lot of wars. There's no outside wars taking place. Letting these Muslim leaders who were up in charge rule through the local leaders. So the Hindu princes that were in charge of the area, they're called Maharajas. They could really control the local people right through their regular leaders. A lot of times there was intermarriage between different groups, which really helped that out a lot in terms of kind of relationship. Trade opened up with Europe. We see Britain end up taking over Europe at this time because European countries are trading with India in the 15 to 1800s AD. And so we really see a lot of connection between Europe at that point. In fact, some of the national dishes in Great Britain are originally Indian dishes. We'll talk more about this in the second semester, how this all fits together. By far, some of the art architecture, some of the greatest stuff that happens in terms of the Mughal Empire. And that's all down to Shah Jahan, who did like things here like the Taj Mahal, which was the mosque for his late wife. You see it's very, very, it's more of a tourist trap today, but you see the really cool minarets and all those kind of things around the mosque here. You see artwork showing elephants and different kind of traditions in India. So think about the whole Indian unit we did here, guys, and a little week and a half on India. We're going to China next. But we have talked about the continent already, the monsoon, the caste system, patriarchal society, the oldest writings in the world, the Vedas and the Sanskrits, two religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam that exist here in India, and also analyze our empire to look at those. Please review these guys. We're looking to do a test probably right before the parent-teacher conference break. So probably next week we're talking. So please review these, and we'll be ready for that then. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk about this all in class on Wednesday.